Legacy media is falling apart, and as it crumbles, a void is opening, a void that we intend to fill. The big legacy news networks currently average just 1.2 million viewers a weeknight, and those numbers are only going to get lower. Legacy media is dying, and the younger generation has moved on. Legacy media panders. Legacy media lies. Legacy media does not know what the truth is, and they don't care about it. Legacy media is a dumpster fire. This is why we few in our wild imaginations have started the Fight Laugh Feast Network. Our goal is to take down the legacy media giant of the last 50 years with our 5 stones. We started in 2016 with our flagship show, Cross Politic. Since those small beginnings, we now air on DirecTV. Our broader podcast network now gets over 4 million downloads a year. And our Fight Laugh Feast pub, which includes TV shows like This America, The Rowdy Christian's Guide, Pastors in Politics, and As the Lord Pleases, with your support, many more to come. Our goal is to become the flagship new media 2.0 network over the next 50 years and take over nightly news, sports, sitcoms, hunting shows, and more, all conveniently stored for you in our Fight Laugh Feast pub. We're already reaching the next generation through our podcast shows on YouTube, X, and our pub, while also tapping into legacy media audiences by airing our shows on TV through DirecTV and Xfinity. We have made a lot of progress with some duct tape and a good bit of intuition and a lot of sweat. And now we need your support more than ever. The TV networks have had such a negative impact on our households, and we're trying, by the grace of God, to put a stop to that. We have the opportunity. We just need the army. Now more than ever, we need you to join our pub to help us reach our goal of 1 million pub supporters in the next 5 years. There's no way around it. Competing with Fox and the Alphabet networks without money is virtually impossible. It's cheap for you to join. And when you do, you're combining your small monthly support with a growing army of like-minded Christians. We have thousands, we need millions. So if you want more of the Alphabet network's misinformation and lies, don't join. But if you want to give us a mere 5 stones, then please join the pub, and together we will take a swing at the head of big media, all the while fighting, laughing, and feasting to the glory of God.
Gotta bring up that volume when Knox isn't here.
Knox.
It's okay. It's okay. We can do this at Knox. Hey, y'all. Welcome to Cross Politic on the Fight Laugh Feast Network. Pastor Toby, the water boy, and Knox is out working hard.
Yeah.
So if you want to become a corporate partner and bring Knox back to the office, reach out to me at waterboycrosspolitic.com and we can make that happen. I'm so excited to have Auron Macityre coming on, Total State.
Yeah.
To talk about his book and all the current events
and all
going
the things.
on. All the things.
All the things.
All the things.
Are you concerned your child's current education won't give them the skills necessary to succeed in any area of life? Consider homeschooling with Classical Conversations. By applying the classical Christian model of education, the Classical Conversations curriculum encourages students to learn how to learn and how to think for themselves so they can adapt to every challenge life throws at them, like the total state. Join the over 50,000 families in 50 countries who have chosen to educate their children with Classical Conversations by visiting classicalconversations.com/FLF. That tells them that we sent you. classicalconversations.com/FLF. But wait, I've got one more. Public houses or pubs are not just places to drink beer, wine, cider, or something a little stronger. It's also a unique social center, very often the focus of community life in villages, towns, and cities throughout the world. We here at Cross Politic hope to emulate that for you and yours. That's why you should grab yourself a pub membership at fightlaughfeast.com. The pub is what we call our Fight Laugh Feast Club. We need you on this ride with us, so pull up a chair, grab a pint, and join us on this ride at fightlaughfeast.com. That's fightlaughfeast.com. Join the pub, join the club, and of course you get discount to our Fight Laugh Feast conference this fall, and access to backstage content, special shows, and the rest. So fightlaughfeast.com, join the pub.
And do it online, not in the app. Saves you money, saves us money.
Don't
online. And in the note section, maybe put something like free chocolate Knox.
Free chocolate Knox.
Get it back in the studio or something.
Yeah, cool. Hey, we're really grateful to have with us Auron Macityre. He's a columnist, lecturer, author focusing on the applications of political theory. He's the host of the Auron Macityre Show podcast on The Blaze, and he lives with his wife and son in the free state of Florida. Auron, thank you for joining us on Cross Politic.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. So, as we were getting ready to start the show, we said we really do want to talk to you about
the book,
The Total State. Everybody needs to go out and buy it. It's fantastic. But of course, some things have been happening. I really do want to try to weave this together for you because
it's all connected.
I do think it's connected.
Yeah.
We just recorded a segment about the assassination attempt on former President Trump. And obviously there's all kinds of questions and speculation still going on about, how much of this is collusion or some kind of plot, or is this massive incompetence that lets this 20-year-old kid with a rifle on a unguarded roof. But I wondered how much of this, so you in your book are analyzing leadership styles between, you use kind of the fox and lion imagery and describe the total state, particularly as this emergence of this managerial elite class of fox-like leaders. And my question, if this doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I honestly it occurred to me how might that analysis fit on top of trying to figure out what's the most likely thing that happened in this thing with Trump?
Yeah, I appreciate you working really hard to work the book into current events. That's the promo move there. But yeah, it's important to recognize, I think, that for a long time, our government has been run by people who are very unacquainted with violence. They are very far removed from any kind of military service. They're not really aware of what it means to be in a scenario where you lead with strength, these kind of things. They're very used to nudging people, using social manipulation, using these different technological systems, large managerial bureaucracies. These are the things that have been driving our government for a very long time. And a very classic symptom of a heavily Fox-style government is that the more lion-style aspects of your government start to atrophy. Things like your military, things like your Secret Service. So when you look at a scenario like this, we ask ourselves, was there a plot here? Did they actively go ahead and encourage this guy to sit on the roof? Is there some kind of conspiracy? Any of that's possible. I'm not here. We're still collecting a lot of information. I'm not here to sell people on some idea, speculate on things that we don't know yet. But one thing we do know is that our security services have been focusing particularly on DEI, making sure that they are diverse, that they are inclusive, choosing people over their skin color or their gender or some sexuality or some other aspect other than their competence. And obviously, they really don't like Donald Trump. And so it seems to me, at least from the outside, from the little bit of knowledge that I have, what's going on right now, what it looks like is that they didn't like Donald Trump. They went ahead and assigned him the D-tier team from the Secret Service. We already know that they were trying to remove his Secret Service protection and have denied increased Secret Service protection to him. So he's probably already running on a relative skeleton crew of people who are not highly ranked in the Secret Service. And on top of that, the quality of people in the service has been affected by not hiring people on merit, but instead choosing them on these factors. All this works together to put us in a scenario where if you scream, hey, that guy's Hitler long enough, some crazy leftist eventually gets the hint, takes it seriously, and puts the Secret Service through the test. And the test, they did not do well. Let's put it that way.
Wasn't a very hard test either.
Yeah. And, it also kind of explains, though, too, in some ways, like how this sort of Fox-like managerial elites can be saying the kinds of things they've been saying about Trump. He's Hitler-like. These are Nazis. This is a threat to our democracy, our way of life, and then using even language that's sort of loaded with violence, and maybe the literal elements of that to not even enter their minds. Like they're not even thinking in those categories in some respects, even though it's very, very inflammatory.
They're living it out.
Yeah.
That's right. It's all word manipulation to them, right? Because they are these people who are about combinations, word games. It's nothing's concrete, nothing's real. They don't deal with the reality of violence, the visceral nature of the consequences of these kind of actions. So yeah, they throw these words around. They're like people fighting on Twitter, man, right? They're super tough. if you put them in a room with someone, they wouldn't say any of those words.
Yeah.
But when they have the ability to just say it without consequence, they explore this. So you're exactly right. One of the dynamics of these people is they don't put the proper weight on their rhetoric because they are so completely detached from the consequences. They can't imagine actually paying a price for what they say.
Yeah.
So is J.D. Vance a lion or a fox?
It's a great question. Of course, Vance is himself a military veteran, so there's that on his side. I would say that it's hard to imagine most of our current leaders as lions, even though Trump obviously just had a huge moment where I think he showed a level of lion characteristic that people, myself included, did not see in him. And so that moment is galvanizing, obviously, when a man is tested under fire like that and responds the way that Trump did. That certainly says something very deep about his character. Vance having that military background and I think being chosen for the reason that he aligns very much with some of the priorities that Trump has, I think is important. I had said to multiple people, I think Vance is going to be the pick. And I think he should be the pick because I think there should be someone behind Trump that terrifies the left because they're going to try to do this again. And there needs to be someone behind Trump that's an heir apparent that can pick up the ball and run with it should something terrible happen.
Yeah.
A big part of your book is not only describing sort of how this total state develops slowly over time, but then also sort of is critical of conservative strategies for dealing with it. For decades, conservatives have been saying things like, we need to return to the Constitution. We need small government, limited government. It hasn't been working. Why hasn't it been working?
Well, because conservatives didn't really mean that. Almost no conservatives who talk about wanting to go back to the founders and the Constitution actually know what the Constitution says, what the Federalist Papers say. Do you mean go back to the founding fathers who didn't believe in a standing army? Do you mean to go back to the founding fathers who didn't believe in the direct election of senators, who believe that you should have blasphemy laws and have state churches on the books? Those founding fathers, guys like John Jay, who talked about how the fact that we have a common ancestry and a common language, a common heritage, these are the things that will bind us together as Americans. Most people don't bother to take a look at guys like John Adams, who said, no, you have to be more religious or the Constitution just simply will not work. We ignore all those facts when we talk about going back to the Constitution. There's a lot more to it, but I think that's a huge part of it is people who call for that simply don't even know what they're asking.
Where do you think that like the total state, the managerial class, like what could you pinpoint in like history? Here's where it started.
Sure. A lot of people might look at somebody like Woodrow Wilson and the right. He's kind of starts off this idea of the president as more of a professor, a expert, a manager, if you will. I think FDR certainly exacerbates that quite wildly. Most people would probably trace this to FDR and his massification of the state using the bureaucratic apparatus. The main shift is really when social organization goes from being something centered around bourgeois capital, and instead that capital has to invest in very large bureaucratic institutions that it can't run. One of the main points of my book is once the separation between kind of the capitalism we think of, where the capitalists own the business and they run the kind of thing, once that separates to the style we have now, where every decision at every level is made by vast distributed networks of people, that's really the moment that changes everything. And now that's not just businesses that are run that way. Our government is run that way. Even our churches are run that way at this point. And I think that the total shift that we underwent from a more organic way to organize our society to these mass managerial bureaucracies, that's really when we can say that the total state started its rise.
So you said churches are run that way. Are you saying churches are now being run by basically the managerial class?
I would say a large number of them are, not all of them, but when you scale a church to a particular size, when you gain a certain number of members, it simply becomes necessary for you to go ahead and deploy certain aspects of the managerial system, which is why things like our military and all these people who you would not expect to act as managers sound more like CEOs. Let's be honest, a lot of sermons at this point sound more like tech talks than people who are actually talking about the gospel. And that's not an accident. These people are chasing a style of leadership. They are chasing a style of institutional organization. And so the core of my book is that there are a lot of problems. We can point to a lot of issues. We can point to a lot of things that we can debate when it comes to our politics, but our problems are far deeper than that. They exist on the very frame of which our institutions are resting. And that is something that we have to think much more deeply about. It's not just about tweaking policy somewhere.
So why did we go down this path, Auron? As a broadly Christian and Protestant country, filled with churches and known for the stability and the centrality of family and tradition. I mean, these are some of the things that we were known for. Why do we give that up? And what are we chasing? Why do we do this?
Well, we're really battling against a aspect of human nature. Power has a particular metaphysic to it. It attempts to centralize pretty much in all cases. And that means that the power dynamic between different states is really an arm race. Here I'm using states as countries, not as individual United States.
Yeah.
And so, James Burnham was the guy who originally coined the managerial revolution in the 1940s. And really, James Burnham was a forgotten political theorist. He helped to co-found the National Review, but is often forgotten when it comes to people thinking more of Buckley and other leaders in the conservative movement. And he talked about the fact that basically when we think of the 1930s, we think of the Soviet Union and we think of Nazi Germany and we think of liberal democracies like the United States, and we treat them as very different governments. And while there are major differences between them, they all share this aspect of managerialism. They were all required to adopt this version of social organization after the Industrial Revolution, because just the realities of mass production and mass consumption and the power of quantity, the reign of quantity, really entered into view. And we can go deeper into this if you want, but one of the aspects of my book that I really focus on is the fact that the managerial formula requires us to go ahead and dissolve all of these classic bonds, especially those of faith and family. And so the reason that I think we abandoned many of these things is actually that we were drawn. Our history had a particular gradient that was drawing us towards this managerial structure. It's something that we have to work very hard to fight against, but it's not really a surprise that we, like so many modern nations, fell under its sway.
So I actually would like to hear a little bit more about that. Let me read this ad, and then I want to come back to you and have you develop that a little bit further. Do you own a business and write a lot of proposals? If so, you should check out smartpricingtable.com. Smartpricingtable.com. Smart Pricing Table cuts down on back and forth, incorporates powerful upsells, and allows you to create proposals at lightning speed. When your prospect is ready, they can e-sign and you're off to the races. Download the free guide, The Profitable Proposal Blueprint, at smartpricingtable.com. So, Auron, I would like to hear you develop that a little bit further. What is it about that managerial instinct that maybe grasp? I mean, I think you're intimating that it was grasping for power, the consolidation, but that inherently is destructive of family and faith. What is it about that makes it incompatible?
So human organization is one of particularities, right? You were born to a particular family. I was born to a particular family. We were both born to our faiths. These are things that, or maybe you weren't. I guess I shouldn't make that assumption, but I was.
We were.
Okay. But this is something that is very ingrained in who we are. And these things, if done properly, should shape the way that we behave, right? If you're somebody with a large number of children because you're religious or you're a Bible-believing Christian, maybe you oppose spending all of your life working for the corporation. Maybe you oppose usury. Maybe you oppose working on Sundays, right? Yeah. You oppose or you support Sabbath laws. If you're a devout Muslim, then you have certain dietary restrictions, or Jew. These are all things that are particular to our cultures, our way of lives, our religions, our tribes, our families. And these things are all problems for the managerial regime because the managerial regime is built on uniformity. Think of it as a assembly line, right? The reason that the assembly line is much faster and much better at producing the Model T is because the assembly line turns everybody into basically a human machine. Yeah. You do exactly the same job over and over again. You don't build a car start to finish yourself. you take a little piece of the project and you specify, you specialize, you drill down, and you basically become a human machine doing that one action over and over and over again. Well, managerialism is basically an assembly line for people. It does the same thing where it needs to go ahead and universalize and homogenize us as individuals into basically these fungible widgets that can be swapped out at will. That's what allows them to create the scale and efficiency that they have. And this is why we see the desire to homogenize our cultures outside of the United States. For instance, you'll notice that places like India are getting Starbucks ads about transgenderism. That seems weird until you understand that actually that has everything to do with coffee consumption inside the managerial framework. If you can go ahead and turn every person into the same blank slate onto which managerial processes can go ahead and be pressed, then you create a system where you can maximize your efficiency inside the managerial elite.
Wow.
That's a really good explanation.
Very, very helpful and terrifying.
So it seems to me, backing up, you said power centralizes. Mm-hmm. That's the, I guess, inherent tendency of powers to consolidate. How do we, resist that temptation? I mean, I'm thinking of, I'm a husband. I don't want me to become a tyrant. I think of if I was a mayor of a city, there's all these problems in the city. Yeah. I don't want to be the guy that has to solve all of them or whatever. If I'm governor of Idaho, I don't want to be, I understand. It seems to me the tendency of power to consolidate almost comes from like some sort of hero complex. I want to be the hero and I got the power so I can kind of try to deal with all this stuff, fix everything, right? And that would be COVID Trump. That would be, all that jazz, whatever it is, Fauci. What do you propose to keep that power where we recognize there's legitimate power and authority? We recognize that.
Yeah.
But also keep it from consolidating and centralizing.
So there's a micro and a macro aspect to this. The macro aspect might be a little more tragic. It might be part of the human condition that we simply go through these cycles. Something I talk about in the book is that I really believe that ultimately the Tower of Babel is a repeating pattern throughout human history. Yeah. We're not the first civilization to go through this. Rome, many other empires have gone through this same cycle, so much that those like Oswald Spengler that talk about cyclical history wrote a 1,000-page book explaining exactly why this is a truth about human nature. One of the things that's just the case is that while we may not like what has happened at the end of this managerial process, part of the reason we went through the managerial process is that the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany and other states were going through it. And had we not done it, we might have fallen behind. There is an arms race aspect of this. And when you're looking at a geopolitical context, you might not always get to choose whether or not you go along with this process. However, the key thing I think that's important for people to understand is that ultimately the way to stop the centralization of power is alternative spheres of sovereignty. Again, when our founding fathers wrote the Constitution, yes, they divided our branches into 3 branches, but they were drawing on Baron de Montesquieu, who is an admirer of the English Constitution. And Montesquieu's interest in creating the separation of powers, the one that we then copied into the Constitution, was that different social spheres, different aspects of the realm would involve themselves. Yes, you had the king, but you also had the merchant class, you had the aristocrats, you had the military, you had the church, you had the peasants, you had all these different forces. And if each one of them was given a voice through these different branches, these different parts of the government, then the interests that were organic to those spheres of sovereignty would go ahead and push back against each other. But what we've done in the United States is strip out all of those things. We don't have a strong church anymore. We don't have strong families anymore. The idea of an aristocracy in many ways feels like an anathema to us, especially after we got rid of the 17th Amendment, making senators very less aristocratically chosen than they were previously. Mm-hmm. And so what has happened is we've really fallen into this position where we don't have any opposing spheres of sovereignty. It's just the individual and the state. And whenever it's just the individual versus the state, the individual will always lose. Yeah. We need other people, other social organizations to actually oppose the centralization of power.
So I'm glad you brought up abolition of man in your book, because that is the total state.
Right.
The abolition of man describes, this educational, managerial, process people thing that you're talking about.
Yeah.
and it seems like, I mean, Abolition of Man is so like, there's a Orwellian sense to it, and then there's this, C.S. Lewis is obviously describing things that he was seeing in his time, and how it's really, I mean, like the managerial state's just grown, multiple times since he's passed on. You want to describe kind of a little bit what you're getting at with that abolition of man and the total state?
Yeah, of course. And this is why That Hideous Strength, which is, of course, his novelization of the Abolition of Man, doesn't get enough credit. Everybody talks about 1984 or Brave New World. Which one is it? No, it's neither. It's absolutely That Hideous Strength.
That's right.
Because Lewis completely saw what was happening. As you said, he recognized that the organic humanity of people was being stripped out and reduced down into this very managerial form. Right. This is where of course the famous line about men without chests comes from. We rip out the organ but demand the function. And that really is the managerial state. They want to reduce all of those lion aspects, all of those things that might push back against their authority. They want to basically turn everyone into the most deracinated feminine character available, so that they're pliable to all of the machinations of the regime. And this is why they're so terrified of anybody who seems even a little bit like they have a leadership ability, like they might have some level of nobility to them, like they might be able to inspire men, because the entire regime is built on keeping everyone so weak that they could never push back against the Fox style regime. They're very, very scared of lions, which is why they call them all authoritarian the minute they see one.
That is so good.
It is. So you say towards the end of your book, the strategy of trying to restore the Constitution has been seriously flawed. There's really no kind of returning. It's not like you can go back. We have to go through.
Is the Constitution dead? Is that what is that what you said?
Something like that. But so maybe riffing off of this That Hideous Strength imagery. I mean, Lewis is obviously presenting a way forward, a way through in the community of St. Anne's. What is your proposal? What's the way through? We can't go back. Maybe what does that mean that we can't go back, and what's the way through?
Yeah, really, the problem, like I said, with going back is most of the people who talk about going back don't even know what they mean. They're not even familiar with the actual founding and the beliefs that the founders had, which is why we get into so many of these weird debates over what's Christian nationalism or any of this stuff, because people don't basically just know the history of what America was and what its actual beliefs were. Yeah. But even if we did know those things, we couldn't go back to them because we're fundamentally different people. We were not forged in the fires that the founding fathers were. We've very frankly gotten soft in a lot of areas and are unable to follow them in that way. And what that means is that before we can become the kind of people who are worthy of being governed by a document like the Constitution, we first have to return ourselves to a state of virtue. Really, that's the key thing. All of these constitutions are only as valuable as the people who actually enforce them. The Constitution isn't some magical piece of political technology. It's a reflection of the traditions and folkways and heritage of the people who founded the United States. And if we aren't those people, as the founders themselves said, then we can't be governed by that document. And that means that we have to find a way forward. We can get into the specifics of what that means if you want to, but generally the important thing is putting ourselves back onto a path where we recognize that it is the way we organize ourselves and the character of the people that is far more important than anything else in this moment. C.S. Lewis is presenting something of a counter in the community that's gathering around St. Anne's in That Hideous Strength. What is that? How would you summarize? How does that contrast with, and how is that potent against the machinations of the folks at the what is it called? Bellberry or something like that? I forgot what it's called. It's been a little bit, so I don't remember all the name details of the book. But yeah, I think the important thing is, again, that these communities of virtue are ones in which we know each other. We understand that we share a moral vision. We can hold each other accountable. We're building real bonds of community in the way that de Tocqueville recognized when he wrote Democracy in America. He said the thing that makes America run, the reason that it can be self-governed in the sense that people mean, is that it's actually community governed.
Right.
That there's these voluntary associations that all of these Americans with extreme civic vigor involve themselves with on a regular basis. And because you have these fraternities and mutual aid societies and churches and everything else, you don't need a total state. In fact, you can't create a total state. One of the most remarkable books I read in the last year was Fustel de Coulanges' The Ancient City. And he talks about the way in which religion was incredibly central to the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks. In fact, he traces so many of the rights that we believe are, inherent rights in some way to the religious aspects of these peoples at those times, and how these defined every part of their lives. And in one of the greatest lines in the book is that he talks about when Rome tried to shift from becoming a republic to an empire. And he said the first thing it had to do was destroy the power of the families. Yeah. These patriarchs, these guys who had led the Roman families and held so much power and so much prestige, that their power had to be diminished if the state was going to become centralized and the power was going to become imperial, because you couldn't allow that organic community to be the thing that was actually guiding people's lives. And I think that's the kind of thing that C.S. Lewis and people like me are hoping would go ahead and arise to fight back against what we're seeing now. Which
truly is a recovery. I mean, that is a going back, but it's going back in a very practical way. Go back and build a family. Go back and build traditions, build generations.
This goes back to the question I asked. How do you keep power from consolidating? Well, one of the ways you do that is all the proper functioning governments need to
assume their
power,
right?
The authority that God's given them.
That balances out the
church
imbalances.
needs to be faithful with its power and authority. The family with its power and authority, and the civil government. That's how you balance it out over time.
Yeah,
Aaron, how does you mentioned Christian nationalism? I however you define it, I basically define it how Pastor Doug defines it. I love my country and I'm a Christian.
And my country should be Christian.
It's very basic to me. And it's kind of like where our roots were at, where our founding roots were at. How do you think Christian nationalism, as I would define it, you work on your own definition, whatever. Do you think Christian nationalism is part of actually the solution here?
It can be. I agree. I say this to all of my friends who are Christian nationalists, because I agree with a lot of the project. I think that the goals are good. I think that as a Schelling point, it's a good start for people to start thinking about how they can organize. These are all positive things. I'm not against the idea of Christian nationalism. My only concern with Christian nationalism right now is the way that it gets defined or redefined. Obviously, I think that the media was very interested in pushing the term because they really wanted to mean white Christian nationalism. They want to use that as an attack. I was also recently at NatCon in Washington, D.C., and Josh Hawley declared himself a Christian nationalism, but his Christian nationalism was very different than, let's say, Stephen Wolf's Christian nationalism. And so the only problem I have with Christian nationalism is it's good entry point, because, as you said, I'm a Christian and I love my nation, and so therefore I think that the biblical truth should be reflected in the organization of my nation. I'm on board with all these things, but almost because it's a little too broad, it also allows people to very quickly shift the definition of what that is. And while you do have a book, hey, here's the book, this is what it's on. That doesn't. Most people aren't going to read that, so they're going to think Christian nationalism is whatever CNN tells them it is.
Last question here, because I know you got to go, but the GOP convention's happening this week. Project 25 has been a big discussion over the last couple of weeks, and of course the liberals are trying to malign Trump with Project 25 and trying to
2025.
2025, but I think they call it Project 25. I think maybe I'm wrong. To me that seems so smooth and right.
You just do that though a lot.
It's cleaner.
I understand. How does Project 25 kind of come into this conversation with your book on total state?
Well, it recognizes something critical about the way that our government is currently run, which is that the bureaucracy is the state. We've invested so much of the power that once used to be in the articles of our Constitution into what many people would call the deep state. But I think it goes beyond the non-elected bureaucracy. It also goes into the media, academia, all these other corporations. And so that's why I have the more total state. But either way, the recognition is that so much of this power has been vested in personnel inside these bureaucracies. And so what Project 2025 is supposed to do is to set up an alternative way for Trump to staff. One of the main problems he ran into early on is that he originally appointed a bunch of people who were loyal to him, but they couldn't get anything done because they didn't have the connections and the bureaucratic credentials that were required to operate the levers of power. But then he appointed new people, and those people did have the ability to operate those levers and those credentials and connections. But because they came from that world, they all also hated him. They all betrayed him in that moment. And this is a huge problem for the right because we don't own the credentialing mechanisms. We don't own the universities. We don't own the bureaucracies. Right. We don't own a lot of these NGOs and other people that go ahead and credential these bureaucrats. And so it was impossible basically for Trump to properly staff the first time around, which really tells you what a poverty of preparation we had on the right. Yeah. We were the dog that caught the car and then had no idea what to do with it. But hopefully Project 2025 creates a bank of people who would be loyal to more of the Trump vision of instituting policy while also having the skills, having the requisite credentials and connections necessary to make this machine work. I have my own concerns about it. Again, the point of the book is that I think ultimately this form of social organization drives us inevitably towards the global managerial state that we see right now. I don't think ultimately that's avoidable, but that is an internal debate. Ultimately, it does make sense to at least have this staff available. You can't even dismantle this Leviathan until you've staffed it with people who are willing to take it apart. And I think really that's the first step.
Auron, where do you want people to buy your book at?
Of course, you can find it on Amazon. It's at Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. Of course, you could order it through your local bookstore. They may not have that in stock, but you can put it in there. But any of those are great.
Is Barnes & Noble still around?
Apparently. Go get yourself a
Both
copy.
of them. You could go to either one.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, very good. Well, hang on the line. We're going to close out here.
The Total State.
Auron
Macityre. Buy it today. Get your copy.
I found out about Auron, excuse me. My brother's name is Aaron. Sorry, Auron. I'm sure that happens all the time. But I found about him this last year and been following him on Twitter. It's been very interesting to follow. So if you're single, get married. If you're married, have kids. If you have kids, go baptize them. Until tomorrow, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politic.